The oppressive humidity of a Tokyo summer morning on August 6, 1945, settled heavily within the subterranean chambers of the Imperial General Headquarters. At precisely 8:30 a.m., the unceasing thrum of fluorescent lights provided the only steady sound, a stark contrast to the nation's tumultuous 4-year engagement in a relentless global conflict. Every breath in the stifling air seemed to carry the immense burden of a people fighting for their very existence. Throughout the labyrinthine corridors, staff officers, their khaki uniforms visibly darkened by perspiration, hunched diligently over vast communication panels. Their precise movements involved plotting miniature pins onto colossal wall maps, each pin marking the ever-shrinking boundaries of the Japanese Empire. Amidst this scene of grim dedication, General Korochika Anami, the esteemed War Minister of Japan, moved with an unshakable poise. At 58 years of age, his visage, deeply etched by years of military service, exuded the profound self-assurance of a man who had never personally experienced defeat and who harbored an absolute, almost spiritual conviction in Japan's preordained destiny. The customary morning briefing was anticipated to unfold routinely, a compilation of overnight dispatches from various garrison commanders stationed across the home islands, and crucial updates concerning the colossal Ketugo defense preparations. These elaborate defenses were meticulously crafted to inflict such catastrophic losses upon any invading American forces that the enemy would inevitably be compelled to seek terms for peace. Yet, an unsettling anomaly presented itself. The communication panel designated for the Chigoku Military District remained eerily blank. There were no expected morning reports emanating from Hiroshima's 2nd General Army Headquarters, nor any fresh intelligence from the approximately 400,000 civilians and military personnel residing in Japan's 8th largest urban center. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Radio operators, their brows furrowed with growing concern, frantically manipulated their dials, only to be met with an insistent, desolate static, where the familiar, reassuring crackle of field reports should have resonated. A youthful communications officer, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead despite the subterranean coolness, stammered a chilling report to his superior. "Sir," he managed, "we have entirely lost contact with Hiroshima. All military frequencies, all civilian radio transmissions, everything ceased at approximately 8:15 this morning." General Anami's dark eyes narrowed perceptibly. In the crucible of 4 years of total war, the notion of entire cities simply vanishing from the communication grid was utterly unprecedented. Such a disappearance was particularly unfathomable for a city hosting a major military headquarters, a city that just hours prior had been dutifully reporting its normal defensive postures. The profound question lingered, heavy in the air. What inconceivable force on earth could possess the power to instantly silence 340,000 human beings? To grasp the extraordinary circumstances of August 1945, one must delve into the unique psychology of the 6 powerful men who collectively held the destiny of Japan in their hands. Known as the Supreme War Council, or more informally the Big Six, these individuals were gripped by an unwavering conviction that victory remained within their grasp, even as American B-29 bombers relentlessly reduced their cities to cinders night after night. This formidable group comprised General Korochika Anami, Admiral Somu Toyoda, General Yoshijiro Umezu, Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki, Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo, and Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai. 6 men, burdened with the monumental responsibility for the lives of 70 million people. However, the genesis of their dangerously misplaced confidence lay in a profound secret, one they believed the Americans could not possibly fathom. Since 1940, Japan had embarked on an intense clandestine race to develop its own atomic bomb. This ambitious undertaking involved 2 distinct programs: the Army's NIGO project, spearheaded by the brilliant Dr. Yoshio Nishina, and the Navy's FGO program, directed by Dr. Bunsaku Arakatsu. These were far from amateurish endeavors. Dr. Nishina, in particular, stood as one of the world's preeminent nuclear physicists, a scholar who had collaborated with the legendary Niels Bohr in Copenhagen. His comprehension of the theoretical underpinnings of atomic fission was arguably unmatched by almost anyone alive. Yet this very depth of knowledge had led him to a crucial, albeit ultimately flawed, conclusion: the practical construction of atomic bombs was virtually an insurmountable task. The sheer scale of uranium enrichment alone demanded industrial capabilities beyond any contemporary imagination. It necessitated colossal electromagnetic separation plants, the processing of thousands of tons of uranium ore, and an electrical power consumption that would effectively deplete the energy resources of entire regions. Japan's leading scientists had meticulously calculated that even the formidable United States, with its vast and untouched industrial base, could realistically produce perhaps a mere 1 or 2 atomic weapons at most, and potentially a third, only if their efforts had commenced far earlier than anyone in Japan had dared to suspect. Therefore, when the initial morning reports began to trickle in, fragmented, contradictory, and almost beyond belief, the military leadership dismissed them with the ingrained assurance of men who believed themselves privy to superior scientific and strategic intelligence. The first somewhat coherent dispatch from a reconnaissance plane simply stated, "A small number of B-29s attacked Hiroshima with a new type of bomb. Considerable damage observed." Admiral Toyoda, serving as the chief of the Naval General Staff, hardly bothered to divert his gaze from his intricate strategic maps. "Considerable damage from a mere handful of bombers," he mused, his voice tinged with skepticism. He had personally endured and overseen the aftermath of the colossal B-29 raids that had already obliterated 42 major Japanese cities. Most likely a highly concentrated incendiary assault, he concluded. The Americans are merely perfecting their efficiency. Nevertheless, as the hours inexorably passed, the incoming reports grew progressively more bizarre and unsettling. Train schedules to Hiroshima had been abruptly and indefinitely suspended. Military communications remained stubbornly and completely severed. Most disquieting of all, a weather reconnaissance plane relayed an utterly unprecedented observation: a colossal mushroom-shaped cloud ascending majestically to an altitude of nearly 40,000 feet into the heavens. Then, the pivotal moment arrived with President Truman's radio announcement, broadcast via shortwave and meticulously intercepted by Japanese monitors. His words reverberated with chilling clarity. 16 hours ago, an American airplane dropped 1 bomb on Hiroshima, an important Japanese army base. That bomb had more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. It is an atomic bomb. A profound, almost suffocating silence descended upon the Supreme War Council meeting room. Finally, General Anami broke the stillness, his voice deliberately measured, imbued with the practiced calm of a seasoned military officer. "The Americans are merely engaging in psychological warfare," he declared. "Even if they have managed to develop some form of atomic device, the immense technical requirements render mass production utterly impossible. Our own exhaustive research unequivocally confirms this assessment." Admiral Toyoda offered a grim nod of agreement. "If the Americans truly possessed an arsenal of such devastating weapons," he reasoned, "they would undoubtedly have deployed them months ago. This is unequivocally a desperate gambit, perhaps representing their solitary such device." What these leaders tragically failed to comprehend was the insidious truth. Their advanced scientific expertise had paradoxically morphed into their gravest vulnerability. Their extensive atomic research had indeed illuminated the extraordinary difficulty of the task, but it had concurrently blinded them to the sheer, unfathomable scale of American industrial capabilities. The monumental Manhattan Project had mobilized an astonishing 130,000 workers across numerous states, consumed more electricity than entire sovereign nations, and stood as the single largest, most secretive industrial undertaking in the annals of human history. The Japanese military leaders were making decisions founded upon what they understood to be within the realm of possibility, yet they were locked in a conflict against an adversary that had fundamentally redefined the very essence of what was possible. As August 6th transitioned into August 7th, and as the initial horrifying details began to reach the investigation teams, frantically converging upon Hiroshima's devastated ruins, these 6 men clung desperately to their ingrained certainties, much like drowning sailors grasping at fragmented debris. They remained utterly oblivious that their entire world was on the precipice of an irreversible and cataclysmic transformation. The global stage was poised for an irreversible transformation, a cataclysmic shift that would utterly dismantle established military doctrines and redefine the very essence of armed conflict. Dr. Yoshio Nishina, a preeminent physicist of his era, possessed an unparalleled grasp of the theoretical underpinnings of an atomic bomb. His intellect allowed him to comprehend, perhaps more profoundly than any other living soul, the devastating potential of such a device in conceptual terms. Yet the vast, unfathomable gulf separating abstract scientific theory from brutal, tangible reality could only be bridged through direct, visceral encounter. On August 7, 1945, Dr. Nishina was compelled to traverse that chasm. His arduous 11-hour train journey from the bustling metropolis of Tokyo towards the smoldering remnants of Hiroshima unfolded through an increasingly dreamlike and disorienting panorama. Long before the train reached its destination, Dr. Nishina observed miles of desolation. Trees stood denuded of their foliage, their branches skeletal against the sky. Sturdy telephone poles lay fractured and splintered like fragile kindling, and a peculiar, pungent aroma, acrid and metallic, assaulted his respiratory senses. Eventually, the locomotive shuddered to a halt. The steel tracks stretching ahead had been contorted into grotesque, impassable corkscrews, warped by an unseen immense power that utterly defied rational human understanding. Doctor. Nishina then proceeded on foot for the concluding 5 miles, venturing deeper into the desolate expanse that had once been the vibrant city of Hiroshima. No prior experience, no intellectual exercise, no theoretical calculation could have possibly prepared him for the sheer, unadulterated horror he encountered. Structures had not merely succumbed to collapse, they had been utterly incinerated, reduced to their constituent atoms. Eerily, the indelible imprints of human forms were seared into concrete surfaces. Spectral silhouettes of individuals who, at 8:15 a.m., were simply engaged in their morning commute, unaware that this precise moment would constitute the final flicker of their existence. At the hypocenter, the aerial point directly above where the devastating device had detonated 1,000 feet in the sky, a flawless circumference of absolute obliteration radiated outwards for miles in every cardinal direction. We invite you to stay with us and watch the remainder of this compelling video. Your like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. Please also consider leaving a comment below, sharing where you are from, and your reflections on the profound topic explored in this presentation. Yet, amidst the architectural devastation, the most harrowing specter was undeniably that of the survivors. Dr. Nishina, a distinguished scholar whose entire professional life had been devoted to the meticulous pursuit of scientific understanding, now stood confronted by the grim reality of radiation sickness. This insidious affliction until this moment had been confined strictly to the pages of theoretical physics journals. He witnessed victims whose dermal layers were quite literally sloughing from their bodies, individuals racked by incessant hematemesis, and others whose hair was detaching in alarming profusion. They were, in essence, the living dead, shambling through a landscape of ruins that bore an unsettling resemblance to the barren, hostile terrain of an extraterrestrial world. With hands that visibly quivered, Dr. Nishina meticulously recorded readings with his Geiger counter, the instrument's rhythmic clicking escalating into a frenetic staccato as he neared the epicenter of the blast. This, he realized with chilling clarity, transcended the definition of a mere explosive implement. It represented the unfettered primordial energies of the cosmos violently unleashed upon a populated urban center. Every preconceived notion he had held regarding the destructive capacity and operational boundaries of atomic weaponry had been unequivocally, indeed cataclysmically, proven false. Concurrently, in the distant capital of Tokyo, the esteemed members of the Supreme War Council were on the precipice of receiving intelligence so profoundly shocking that it would render the devastation of Hiroshima a mere precursor. Precisely at 11:02 a.m. on August 9th, while the influential Big Six convened to deliberate upon the initial reports emanating from Hiroshima, an agitated aide abruptly forced his way into the hushed conference chamber. He bore a dispatch whose contents immediately leached the vitality and color from the countenances of all assembled. "Nagasaki," the aide declared, his voice strained, "has been assailed with yet another atomic bomb." And profound stillness descended upon the room, broken only by the sharp, echoing sound of Admiral Toyoda's pen as it slipped from his grasp and clattered against the polished mahogany table. The sheer weight of the announcement hung heavy in the air. A second such weapon, deployed with terrifying swiftness, merely 3 days after the first. In that singular, shattering instant, every deeply held premise upon which the Japanese military command had painstakingly constructed its strategic vision disintegrated with the fragility of parchment consumed by fire. The terrifying logical conclusion became inescapable. If the United States possessed the capability to deploy 2 atomic bombs, they could conceivably wield 3, 10, or even 100. The very cornerstone of Japan's elaborate defensive strategy, predicated on inflicting such grievous casualties during an anticipated Allied invasion that the enemy would be compelled to negotiate terms, was suddenly rendered utterly irrelevant. What rational imperative would compel America to undertake a costly ground invasion when they possessed the horrifying means to systematically obliterate Japanese urban centers one by one until only a desolate, radioactive wasteland remained? Nevertheless, even when confronted by this stark, apocalyptic truth, General Unami remained steadfast in his unyielding conviction, prioritizing a vision of honorable demise over the perceived ignominy of capitulation. Would it not be truly wondrous, he inquired, his voice imbued with a disquieting, almost poetic resonance, for this entire nation to meet its end, consumed like a beautiful, fleeting blossom? His fellow council members regarded him with expressions of profound, stunned silence. Here stood an individual so deeply steeped in the immutable tenets of the warrior's code, so utterly devoted to its principles, that he would consciously advocate for the complete annihilation of his homeland, rather than countenance the dishonor of surrender. Within his rigid worldview there existed a peculiar purity and almost aesthetic perfection in the notion of Japan vanishing in a blaze of atomic fire rather than submitting to the dominion of foreign conquerors. However, the unyielding force of reality was poised to intervene with the most devastating impact imaginable. On August 10th, Japanese military forces successfully apprehended an American fighter pilot, Marcus McDilda, whose aircraft had been downed 2 days subsequent to the Hiroshima bombing. Under intense interrogation, which regrettably involved the use of torture, McDilda relayed intelligence that would ultimately prove instrumental in dismantling the Japanese military's entrenched resistance. The critical flaw in this unfolding drama, however, was that McDilda possessed absolutely no genuine knowledge concerning atomic bombs. He was merely a conventional fighter pilot, entirely unbriefed on the highly classified subject of nuclear weaponry, yet confronted by the brutal coercion of torture and driven by an overwhelming primal instinct for survival. He proceeded to fabricate a narrative, telling his captors precisely what he surmised they desired to hear, meticulously embroidering every conceivable detail with desperate invention. The Americans, McDilda asserted with conviction, possessed an arsenal exceeding 100 atomic bombs, and furthermore, held the capacity to deploy 3 such devices daily. He ominously predicted that Tokyo would be the next target, swiftly followed by the ancient imperial city of Kyoto, and then the industrial hub of Osaka. According to his desperate fabrication, every significant Japanese urban center faced imminent obliteration within a matter of weeks. Crucially, none of these assertions held any truth. In actuality, the United States had precisely 0 operational atomic bombs remaining in its inventory. The subsequent weapon was not anticipated to be ready for deployment until late August, and the overall production pipeline for these complex devices was excruciatingly protracted. Nevertheless, McDilda's desperate and meticulously crafted falsehoods were infused with just enough ostensibly technical terminology and plausible specifics to render them credible to interrogators, who were themselves frantically attempting to grasp any shred of information regarding this utterly incomprehensible new instrument of destruction. When this entirely fabricated intelligence, derived from a terrified pilot, finally reached the hallowed chambers of the Supreme War Council, its impact resonated like a definitive, crushing final blow. War Minister Anami The very individual who had so recently articulated a poetic vision of national destruction now stood before his distinguished colleagues, his voice heavy with the palpable burden of absolute defeat. He began to read directly from the interrogation report. "One atomic bomb," he intoned gravely, "possesses the capability to obliterate 6 square miles, and destructive force equivalent to that of 2,000 B-29 bombers, each laden with 300 conventional bombs. The Americans, it appears, possess an arsenal of 100 atomic bombs. They could deploy 3 such weapons per day. The subsequent target, it is suggested, could very well be Tokyo." A profound, suffocating silence enveloped the chamber, punctuated only by the audible, strained respiration of Admiral Suzuki. These were men who, in their distinguished careers, had commanded vast armies numbering in the millions, meticulously orchestrated intricate military campaigns across the expansive Pacific theater, and had never personally experienced the bitter taste of defeat. Yet they now confronted a weapon of such unprecedented destructive power that it rendered their accumulated military acumen and strategic expertise as utterly antiquated and irrelevant as the revered samurai swords, in an epoch dominated by the unforgiving efficiency of machine guns. Astonishingly, despite the overwhelming and incontrovertible evidence, the council remained in a state of intractable deadlock. 3 votes were cast in favor of immediate surrender, while an equal number adamantly advocated for the continuation of hostilities, even in the face of certain atomic annihilation. It became clear that only an intervention of a magnitude entirely without precedent in the annals of Japanese history could possibly resolve this perilous impasse. A pivotal moment in history unfolded to resolve an intractable impasse. Just as the clock neared midnight on August 9, 1945, an event transpired that was utterly without precedent in more than a millennium of Japanese annals. Emperor Hirohito, revered as a living deity and traditionally positioned far above the mundane sphere of political deliberations, made an extraordinary entrance into a high-stakes conference room. There, he personally intervened to shatter a protracted governmental stalemate, an act that reverberated with immense historical weight. The atmosphere within that chamber was both profoundly unprecedented and eerily surreal. Around a meticulously polished table, the 6 distinguished members of the Supreme War Council, joined by the venerable Baron Kiichiro Hiranuma, were positioned in a posture of deep deference, kneeling formally. The emperor, though physically slight, commanded an immense presence, imbued with the full gravitas of his divine authority. It was he who uttered pronouncements destined to conclude not merely a devastating global conflict, but fundamentally to dismantle and redefine an entire philosophical framework concerning the conduct of warfare. With a voice that was barely discernible, a mere whisper cutting through the tense silence, Hirohito articulated his profound assessment. "I have given serious consideration to the situation at home and abroad." He then delivered the poignant and stark declaration that would echo through history. "We must bear the unbearable and suffer what is insufferable." These words, heavy with the weight of impending national sacrifice and the recognition of insurmountable odds, signaled a tragic but necessary capitulation. We invite you to stay with us and watch the conclusion of this video as the narrative unfolds further. Your like and subscription would be greatly appreciated, helping us to continue sharing these vital historical insights. We also encourage you to share in the comments where you are watching from and your thoughts on this profound topic. In that defining instant, the preeminent military commanders of Japan found themselves confronted with an agonizing and ultimate dilemma: the stark choice between upholding a sacred code of honor and ensuring the very survival of their nation. While some, such as Prime Minister Suzuki, demonstrated a pragmatic willingness to embrace this harsh new reality, others, notably General Anami, resolutely opted for a profoundly divergent course of action, unable to relinquish the established tenets of their martial philosophy. Mere hours preceding the Emperor's historic surrender broadcast on August 15th, General Anami undertook the solemn act of ritual seppuku within the confines of his private residence. His demise was a profound reflection of his life, adhering strictly to a warrior's code of conduct that the advent of atomic weaponry had, with brutal finality, rendered entirely archaic and irrelevant. His poignant final poem, reportedly inscribed in his own blood, articulated an unwavering devotion to the Emperor and expressed deep remorse for his inability to continue his service. Crucially, his final moments revealed an unwavering refusal to concede that the global landscape had undergone a truly fundamental and irreversible transformation. Yet arguably, the most profoundly tragic individual emerging from this epochal shift was Admiral Toyota, a man who had previously asserted with unshakable conviction that the Americans simply could not possess a significant arsenal of atomic bombs. Following the cessation of hostilities, as the full, astonishing breadth of the Manhattan Project was meticulously unveiled, when he grasped that American industrial prowess had achieved what even Japan's most brilliant scientists had deemed utterly beyond the realm of possibility, Toyota was reportedly observed spending countless hours in absolute silence, his gaze fixed upon the harrowing photographs depicting the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a stark testament to his shattered world view. The cataclysmic atomic bombardments did far more than merely bring World War II to its grim conclusion. They irrevocably signaled the demise of an entire military ethos, one deeply rooted in the principles of honor, unwavering sacrifice, and traditional conventional warfare. Today, contemporary military strategists and planners delve into this historical account not merely as an academic exercise in the past, but as a potent and enduring cautionary tale regarding the perils of profound cognitive blindness within leadership echelons. It vividly illustrates how specialized expertise, paradoxically, can transform into an intellectual confinement, and how deeply ingrained professional knowledge can tragically impede leaders from discerning and adapting to genuinely revolutionary transformations. In our current era, as humanity grapples with its own succession of rapid technological revolutions, encompassing the transformative power of artificial intelligence, the intricate challenges of cyber warfare, and the burgeoning domain of space-based weaponry, the compelling narrative of Japan's military leadership in that fateful August of 1945 retains an acutely painful and pertinent relevance. It serves as a stark and powerful reminder that the most catastrophic military failures frequently do not originate from formidable external adversaries, but rather from an inherent internal incapacity to acknowledge and adeptly adjust to emergent and fundamentally altered realities. The Japanese military command struggled to accept the unimaginable destructive capacity of America's atomic bomb, primarily because they had, through their own internal logic and established paradigms, unequivocally persuaded themselves that such a weapon was an utter impossibility. Their accumulated scientific acumen, their deeply entrenched professional expertise, and indeed their profound cultural confidence, inadvertently transformed into instruments that ultimately worked against their own strategic interests. This historical episode underscores a critical lesson. Sometimes the most insidious and perilous adversary is the unshakable conviction that one fully comprehends the immutable rules of engagement, even as an opposing force has already and irrevocably rewritten them for all time.